thought my son and I were invisible, two forgotten souls drifting through towns that never learned our names. But everything changed the morning. A rich farmer stepped out of a black truck, looked me straight in the eyes, and called me a name I'd buried years ago. And before I could run, he said I was his only heir. People think homelessness happens overnight, like one bad moment pushes you off a cliff. But the truth is quieter, slower. It happens the way rust eats metal, piece by piece, unnoticed until the whole structure collapses. I didn't collapse all at once. I bent, cracked, and wore myself thin, trying to shelter my son from a storm I never should have carried alone. Jamie was 8 when the unraveling became impossible to hide. I told him we were traveling, pretending movement was adventure, not desperation. He believed me because he trusted me, and trust is the cruelest kind of innocence a parent can break. We moved constantly, city to city, town to town, never staying long enough for anyone to ask questions. Shelters became temporary havens, park benches became beds, and abandoned buildings became places to hide from cold nights and colder stares. Jamie learned to sleep lightly, to pack fast, to eat slowly so he wouldn't feel hunger later. I hated that he learned these things. A child's vocabulary shouldn't include transition center, outreach van, or expired food pantry. But what I hated more was the truth he didn't know. We were running not from poverty alone, but from the remnants of a past that refused to stay buried. Jamie was tougher than any kid deserved to be. He rarely complained, though I saw the way his shoulders drooped after long walks, the way he curled inward when the nights grew too cold. Sometimes he looked at families in diners or parks with an expression he tried to hide, longing mixed with confusion. I always told him, "We're okay as long as we've got each other." He believed that too, and I tried to believe it for his sake. But deep down, fear gnawed at me. Someday, someone might recognize me, and everything I'd fought to protect would be ripped from us. We ended up in a small rural town that looked like time had forgotten it. One main road, a handful of businesses, and a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and fried onions. The shelter there was full almost every night, so we slept behind the municipal building, shielded by concrete barriers from the harsh autumn wind. Jamie curled against me under my jacket, breathing in short, tired bursts. I stayed awake more often than not, listening for footsteps, voices, anything. My instincts were old but sharp. I'd learned long ago that danger comes softly before it strikes loudly. One morning, Jamie shook me awake before sunrise. "Dad, someone's coming," he whispered. Fear jolted me upright. In our world, footsteps rarely meant anything good. I positioned myself in front of Jamie just as a black pickup truck rolled out of the fog. Sleek, polished, expensive. The kind of vehicle no one in our situation had any business being near. It stopped 20 feet from us. The door opened slowly. A man stepped out, tall with silver hair tied neatly, his boots spotless despite the mud. He didn't look around with disgust. He looked directly at me, like he'd known exactly where to find us. "Mark," he said. Just that. My name. My real name. One I hadn't spoken aloud in years. My heart slammed against my ribs. Jamie peered around my arm, confused. No one called me Mark anymore. I was Mike, Mac, Sir, or nothing at all. But this man said it with certainty, like reading a headline. "You've got the wrong person," I replied, stepping back. The man didn't budge. "No," he said quietly. "I've been searching for you for a long time." Panic flared through me. Nobody looked for us unless they wanted something. And the past, the one I buried, had finally caught up. He took a breath, studying my face with an expression I couldn't read. "My name is Robert Hale," he said. "I knew your father." The ground beneath me seemed to tilt. My father was a name I never shared with Jamie, a ghost I intended to keep locked away forever. "I don't want anything from him," I snapped automatically. Hale shook his head. "This isn't about wanting. It's about what's yours." Jamie tugged my sleeve, whispering, "Dad, what's he talking about?" Hale softened. "Your father left instructions. Everything he owned, land, property, assets, belongs to you now." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because disbelief was the only defense I had left. "My father didn't own anything," I said. "You don't know him." Hale's eyes hardened slightly. "I knew him better than you think, and I promised him I would find you." I hated how his voice cracked on the word promised. Something in it sounded honest. Too honest. Jamie's hand slipped into mine. I didn't squeeze it back. I was frozen, caught between the man I'd become and the boy I once was. The boy who ran from that farm, from that inheritance, from that life. Hale reached into his coat slowly, a gesture that made me tense, and pulled out a folded, yellowed document. "This is the original will," he said, "signed by your father, naming you the sole heir." I didn't take it. I didn't want to touch anything tied to that man. Not after everything. "Why now?" I demanded. "Why find me after all these years?" Hale hesitated, and guilt flickered across his face. "Because I didn't know where you went. You disappeared. And because your father passed away last winter." The words hit harder than I expected. Not grief, just the finality of a door I thought had closed long ago. Jamie looked between us, lost. "Dad. Do you have a dad?" I felt a familiar sting in my chest. I'd tried so hard to build a life where Jamie didn't inherit my shadows. But here they were, creeping out of the fog. "Everyone has a father," I said quietly. "But not everyone has a good one." Hale stepped closer. "Your father wanted better for you than he knew how to give. He made mistakes, terrible ones, but he left something behind, something meant for you. And now, for your boy." I shook my head, refusing to let myself hope for anything that sounded like salvation. "Please," Hale said, gesturing toward the truck. "Let me take you to the property. See it for yourself. If you want nothing to do with it after that, I'll leave you alone. But let your son see what could be his future." Jamie's eyes widened. A future? It broke me. The innocence in his voice, the quiet yearning. I had spent years telling him survival was enough. But children aren't built just to survive. They're built to grow, dream, hope. And I had given him none of that. I swallowed hard, torn between fear and the small flicker of possibility. Hale didn't pressure me further. He simply stepped back, leaving space for me to choose. People rarely offered us choices. Usually they offered warnings, pity, or directions to the nearest shelter. Choices were a luxury for people with stability. And yet, here it was, an unexpected fork in a road I thought only led downward. "Dad?" Jamie whispered. "Can we at least look?" His small hand tightened around mine. In that moment, I realized saying no would be about my pride, not his well-being. My past didn't have to define his future. I exhaled slowly. "All right," I said. "We'll look." The relief on Hale's face was almost painful to watch. He wasn't hiding it well. Whatever connection he had to my father seemed genuine, not opportunistic. But trust was a currency I spent sparingly. I made Jamie sit in the back of the truck where I could see him, and I kept my backpack close, the few possessions we owned pressed against my leg. Hale drove steadily, silently, as the town faded behind us. The world grew quieter, dominated by fields and long stretches of empty land. I recognized the rural roads even before he turned onto the gravel path. Memories clawed their way out, rusty fences, shouting, heavy footsteps in old hallways, my father's angry voice, the back door slamming, the smell of diesel and stale whiskey. I hadn't been back here since I was Jamie's age. I'd run so far from it I thought the land would forget me. But the land remembers. It always does. Hale slowed the truck, glancing at me through the rearview mirror as if checking whether I'd bolt. "We're close," he said softly. My stomach twisted, not from fear of the unknown, but fear of remembering too much. The truck pulled up to a clearing, and there it was, the farmhouse. Weathered wood, sagging porch, windows clouded by time. The barn stood crooked beside it, doors half open like a mouth mid-scream. The fields stretched endlessly behind the property, tall grass waving like ghost hands. Jamie pressed his face to the window. "Dad, it's huge." I didn't answer. My throat felt tight. It was exactly as I remembered it, and completely different. Hale parked and stepped out. "This," he said quietly, "is yours." I didn't move. The word yours felt foreign, almost criminal. Jamie hopped out, his shoes crunching over gravel. He looked around in awe, the way children do when they see something bigger than their world ever allowed them to imagine. "We could live here?" he asked. Before I could answer, Hale said, "If your father wants to." I shot him a warning glare, and he raised his hands. "Just stating the facts." My legs felt rooted to the ground. I didn't trust any of this. My father had never given me anything but bruises, emotional and otherwise. Why would he leave me land? A house? Wealth? Nothing about it made sense. Hale motioned toward the barn. "There's something you should see." Jamie followed, excited, while I kept my distance, scanning the property for signs of danger. Old habits die hard. Inside the barn, dust floated in golden beams of sunlight. Rusted tools lay scattered. Old machinery slumped in corners like dying beasts, and in the far corner stood a tractor, massive, rust-covered, familiar in a way that twisted my gut. "Your father rebuilt that thing 5 times, Hale said. He used to say it was the only thing that never walked out on him. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jamie climbed onto the first step of the tractor, smiling. "It's awesome." Hale looked at me carefully. "Before he died, your father wrote something, a letter addressed to you. I have it locked away. He wanted me to give it only if I was sure I'd found the right man." I stared at him. "And you think that's me?" Hale nodded. "I do." I wanted to scream, to argue, to deny everything. But Jamie's laughter echoed through the barn, a sound I hadn't heard in years, and it softened something I thought was permanently scarred. "Why did he leave it all to me?" I asked finally, voice low. Hale hesitated. "Because you were his only son, his only legacy, and because he spent his final years regretting the distance between you." I clenched my fists. Regret? That was rich. My father had caused the very suffering Hale spoke of. But deep inside, beneath the anger and disbelief, something else stirred. Pain, loss, confusion. I wasn't ready to confront any of it. But standing in that barn, with my son laughing and the scent of old hay rising around us, I realized the past was not done with me. Jamie ran up to me, eyes shining. "Dad, can we stay here? Just for a little?" I looked at him, really looked, and saw the hunger for safety stability, belonging. I'd failed to give him all of that. Maybe this place could. Maybe it was madness. Maybe it was a trap laid by fate. But maybe, just maybe, it was the first good thing life had offered us in years. I exhaled slowly. "We'll see," I said. But as I said it, something inside me whispered the truth. Staying was inevitable. Because for the first time in a long time, hope didn't feel like a threat. We didn't move in that same day. I insisted on it. I told Hale I needed time to think, but the truth was simpler. I needed to breathe without the weight of my past crushing my ribs. He drove us back to the town, back to the cold concrete behind the municipal building. Jamie curled beside me that night the way he always did, but the darkness felt different. Tighter, smaller, harder to swallow. I kept seeing that farmhouse in my mind, the endless fields, the tractor, the barn, and the words that refused to fade. "This is yours." By morning, I'd barely slept. Jamie shivered against me, and I pulled my jacket over him, wishing it were thicker, warmer, more worthy of him. At sunrise, I expected the day to start as all the others did, quiet, dull, exhausting. But a familiar low hum rolled across the empty parking lot. The black pickup emerged from the fog like some omen I hadn't been brave enough to summon. Hale stepped out with careful movements, holding a small envelope in his hand. He didn't approach immediately. He simply set the envelope on a concrete barrier and stepped back, eyes steady. "This came from your father," he said softly. The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. I stared at the envelope like it was an animal that might bite. My father never wrote letters. My father barely wrote his own name unless alcohol loosened his grip on hatred. I didn't touch it at first. Jamie did. He picked it up gently, like something fragile. "It has your name," he said. "Your real one." Hearing him say that made my stomach twist. My real name was a piece of a life I'd sworn to bury, and yet here it was, waiting. I opened the envelope slowly, tearing at the edge like peeling off an old scab. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. The handwriting wasn't the jagged script I remembered. It was shaky, older, weakened. "Mark," it began, no greeting, no apology. "If this reaches you, it means I'm gone. I can't undo the things I broke, but I can try to leave you something better than what I gave you in life." My throat tightened. I'd imagined every version of a letter from him, angry, demanding, cruel. This was none of those. Somehow, that hurt more. The letter continued. "You left for good reason. I know that now. I was not a father worth following. But the land, I kept that for you. I thought maybe someday you'd come back and build something that wasn't stained by my bitterness." I felt the world lurch. He'd never spoken like this, not once, not even in whispers. "If nothing else, don't let Hale scare you off," he wrote. "He's stubborn, but he's loyal. He'll tell you things I was too much a coward to say." At the bottom, a signature. Crooked, slanted, human. I folded the letter and pressed it into my jacket pocket, feeling the weight of it like a brand on my chest. Jamie watched me carefully, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. Hale stayed silent, giving me space. That was the strangest part. He wasn't pushing, wasn't pressuring, just waiting. "We need to eat," I finally said. "Then we'll talk." Hale nodded and left without argument. Jamie and I walked to the church basement, ate watery oatmeal, and sat in silence. I kept fingering the letter in my pocket, as if checking that it was still real. After breakfast, Jamie tugged my sleeve. "Dad, I want to see it again." His voice wasn't demanding. It was hopeful, too hopeful. I swallowed hard. It's not simple, kid. Nothing is simple, he said quietly, repeating my own words from months ago. Sometimes children grow up faster than they should. I kneaded my forehead with my palm, the exhaustion settling deeper into my bones. Maybe running wasn't protecting him anymore. Maybe it was hurting him. I found Hale waiting near the truck, hands in his pockets, eyes patient. "Take us back," I said. "One more time." The drive was quiet. Jamie leaned against the window, wide-eyed as the fields came into view again. I hated how his face softened at the sight of open land, like he was seeing a version of himself that he never got to have. Hale glanced at me in the mirror. "You okay?" he asked. The question startled me. People didn't usually care how I felt. "Doesn't matter," I muttered. "It does if you're going to make decisions that affect your son." I bristled, but he wasn't wrong. Everything I did now mattered more than anything I'd done before. We reached the farm. This time, stepping out of the truck felt different. Less like trespassing, more like opening a door I'd boarded shut. The air smelled the same as it did 20 years ago. Grass, dust, old wood, and something metallic. Memories lurched up like ghosts. My father shouting from the porch, me hiding behind the barn, the creak of the screen door during long, tense nights. Jamie ran ahead, kicking gravel. "It's so big," he said. I envied how he saw the land with wonder instead of dread. Maybe that was my chance, letting him build new memories where mine had rotted. Hale motioned toward the house. "Let me show you the inside." I hesitated. Every step closer felt like walking back into a nightmare. Jamie grasped my hand, grounding me. The porch sagged under our weight, the boards groaning like they remembered the last time my father stormed over them. The front door stuck for a moment before Hale forced it open. Dust billowed out, carrying decades of silence. Inside, the house was exactly as I remembered. Dark corners, faded wallpaper, furniture covered with sheets that sagged like shrouds. Jamie whispered, "It feels sad." I nodded. It always did. The living room smelled of old tobacco and regret. A cracked photo frame lay on the mantel. Hale picked it up and dusted off the glass. Inside was a picture I hadn't seen since I was a boy. My father, arms crossed, stern. My mother, soft smile fading around the edges, and me, barely 5. Jamie stepped closer. "That's you?" I nodded, unable to speak. My mother's face hit me hardest. I'd buried her memory so deeply that seeing her again felt like getting stabbed with warmth and pain all at once. Hale set the frame back carefully, like it was sacred. We toured the kitchen next, peeling linoleum, rusted sink, a table still set with mismatched chairs. I saw the stain on the floor where my father spilled a bottle during one of his rages. I saw the corner where I used to sit, knees pulled to my chest, waiting for storms to pass. Jamie didn't see any of that. He saw possibility. "We could fix it," he said brightly. "Clean it up. Make it nice." I almost told him that some places couldn't be fixed, but the words lodged in my throat. Maybe I wasn't the one who should decide that anymore. Then we went to the room that hit the hardest. My old bedroom. The wallpaper was gone, stripped to reveal bare wood. My childhood drawings were still faintly etched into the wall, half erased by time. Jamie traced one with his finger. "You drew this?" I nodded. "A long time ago." Hale stood in the doorway silently, letting me face ghosts in my own way. I felt something loosen inside me. Not forgiveness, not peace, just space. Space to acknowledge that I survived this place, and maybe that meant something. We stepped back outside, into brighter air. The barn door creaked as Hale opened it. Sunlight filtered through cracks, illuminating motes of dust dancing like slow-falling snow. The tractor sat where it always had, massive, rusted, stubbornly alive. Jamie climbed onto the step and smiled. "Dad, look!" His laughter echoed across the rafters, chasing away shadows. For a moment, the barn didn't feel like a prison. It felt like potential. Hale leaned in. "Your father spent more time fixing this tractor than anything else in his life. Maybe he left more here than you think." I wasn't ready to believe him. "Why are you doing this?" I asked Hale when Jamie wandered deeper into the barn. He hesitated. "Your father wasn't a good man to you. I know that. But near the end, he changed. He regretted things. All of them." I scoffed. "Regret doesn't erase bruises." Hale nodded. "No, but it mattered to him. He wanted you to have what he couldn't give: security, land, a future. I didn't know whether to feel anger or grief. Maybe both. He should have said those things to me when he was alive." Hale's voice softened. "Some men realize the truth too late." Jamie tugged my sleeve again. "Dad, can we look around more?" His excitement was contagious. I nodded, and he sprinted into the fields. Hale crossed his arms. "You see it, don't you?" "See what?" "Your boy is tasting what it feels like to belong somewhere." The words hit harder than I expected. Belonging. A concept Jamie had never known. A concept I'd forgotten. Hale added, "You don't have to decide today, but you should think about what staying could mean for him." I watched Jamie chase his own shadow across the grass, his laughter breaking something open in my chest. We walked the perimeter of the property together, Hale pointing out old fences, a dried-up well, the shed that used to store feed. I didn't remember most of it. Trauma has a way of blurring maps, but Jamie absorbed everything with fresh eyes, cataloging the land like it was a treasure hunt. At one point he asked, "Did you play here?" I hesitated, then answered honestly, "Sometimes, when things were calm." He nodded, as if understanding more than I said. Kids always understand more than adults admit. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying distant echoes of my childhood. By late afternoon, Jamie had explored nearly every corner of the property. Hale stood beside me, hands in his pockets, watching him run. "He looks happy," Hale said. I nodded, throat tight. Jamie tripped, rolled, popped up laughing. A rare sound, one I hadn't heard in too long. "He deserves better than this life," Hale added gently. "You both do." I couldn't argue, not when the truth was etched across my son's smile. Not when I already knew I was out of excuses, but fear clung to me like a second skin. "What if I fail him here too?" I whispered. Hale shook his head. "You haven't failed him. You kept him alive." My jaw tightened. Sometimes that doesn't feel like enough. "Maybe not," he said, "but this place could give him more than survival. It could give him roots." Roots. The opposite of everything I'd built our lives around. Movement, distance, disappearing before danger could take shape. But maybe danger wasn't chasing us anymore. Maybe running was just habit. I watched the horizon shift colors as the sun sank lower. I didn't feel ready. But maybe ready wasn't the point. Maybe courage was moving even when the ground felt unstable. Jamie ran toward me, breathless and flushed. "Dad, can we stay? Please?" His hands grabbed my shirt, hopeful and trembling. I looked at him, the boy who trusted me, followed me, survived with me. His eyes shined with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Possibility. The kind I couldn't give him on the streets. I exhaled slowly, the weight of years pressing down, and then unexpectedly, lifting. "We'll try it," I said. Jamie threw his arms around me, and something inside me cracked open in a painful, beautiful way. Hale smiled softly. The land waited, and whether I liked it or not, our lives had just begun to change. The first night we slept in the farmhouse felt surreal. We unrolled blankets on the living room floor because the bedrooms were still too dusty, and the air smelled of wood rot and long-held silence. But Jamie didn't complain once. He lay beside me with his hands folded under his cheek, whispering, "It's warm here. Really warm." I stared at the cracked ceiling boards, listening to the wind brushing against the house. For years, every night had carried the same fear, that someone would wake us, move us, chase us away. But here, no one came. No one even knew we were here. I woke up before dawn, the way I always did, expecting cold concrete or street noise. Instead, the room was quiet, filled with the soft glow of early morning. Jamie snored lightly beside me. For a long moment, I just watched him sleep. I hadn't seen him look peaceful in years. His face wasn't tightened by cold or hunger. His shoulders weren't hunched against wind. He looked like a child, just a child, finally allowed to rest. And that alone made the weight of this place feel worth carrying, no matter what ghosts lingered beneath its soil. Hale returned that morning with groceries, cleaning supplies, and 2 new mattresses strapped to the back of his truck. I tried to refuse the help. Pride reared up in me like an old wound, reminding me how many times I swore to survive alone. But Hale looked me straight in the eye. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore," he said, "least of all to me." And for once, I didn't argue. Jamie helped him carry boxes inside, humming some tune he must have picked up in town. His lightness filled rooms that had been heavy for decades. We spent the next days cleaning. Dust flew everywhere. Spider webs clung to corners. The floors creaked under every step, as if waking from a long sleep. Jamie dragged the vacuum around like it was a battle machine, shouting "clear" each time he finished a room. I scrubbed the kitchen until my hands stung. The old house began to show signs of life. Sunlight landing on cleared counters, walls breathing again, windows letting in fresh air instead of shadows. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even good yet. But it felt less like a memory and more like the beginning of something new. One afternoon, Hale returned with a metal lockbox. He placed it on the kitchen table with reverence, then stepped back as if it might bite. "This is the last thing your father left," he said quietly. My stomach tightened. The letter had been hard enough. Another piece of him felt almost unbearable. Jamie stood beside me, watching with big, expectant eyes. I slid the box toward me. The key was taped to the top, my father's handwriting labeling it simply, "For Mark." My fingers shook as I fitted the key and turned it. The lock clicked open like a breath released. Inside were documents, birth certificates, old photos, the deed to the land, and a sealed envelope addressed to me. But beneath those lay something else. A leather notebook with my mother's name pressed faintly on the cover. I froze. My mother had always been missing in my story. Not dead, not alive, just gone. A silence I forced myself not to touch. My throat tightened painfully. Slowly, I opened the envelope. My father's voice echoed through the written words. "You deserved to know her. I failed you both. She wanted you to have a home, Mark. She wanted peace for you." I felt the world blur. I hadn't let myself think of her in years. Her face had faded to a memory I wasn't sure belonged to me. Jamie looked up at me. "Dad?" he whispered. I handed him the notebook. "This belonged to your grandmother." He held it carefully, like sacred treasure. When he opened the first page, we saw her handwriting, smooth, warm, familiar in a way that broke something open inside me. She'd written about the farm, about hopes she had for me, about wanting to raise me in the safety of open fields and honest work. It felt like hearing her breathe again. There were photographs tucked into the pages, one of her holding me, laughing as I pulled her hair, another of her standing in front of the barn, younger than I remembered, glowing with life. The contrast to what the house had become felt like a punch. She loved this place, I murmured. Hale nodded quietly. She did, and she loved you. My father's mistakes had buried her legacy under fear and silence, but now her voice, her handwriting, her love, everything resurfaced, not as pain, as possibility, as a reminder that this land didn't begin with darkness. It began with her. Jamie spent the evening reading her words aloud, his voice soft and steady. I sat on the floor, leaning against the cabinets, listening to stories I had spent half my life trying to forget. My mother wrote about planting vegetables, about spring rains, about singing to me while hanging laundry. She sounds nice, Jamie said. She was, I whispered. Grief washed through me, raw, overdue. Not the violent kind, the aching, bittersweet kind that feels like a sunrise more than a wound. For the first time, I saw the farm not as my father's domain, but as hers, as something gentle. The next morning, Jamie found the courage to ask the question he'd been holding. Dad, why did you leave this place? I stared at the field outside, the tall grass swaying. Because it wasn't safe anymore. Because of your dad? I nodded slowly. He wasn't kind. He wasn't stable. And when your grandmother died, everything got worse. Jamie swallowed. But it's safe now, right? I considered that. The land felt changed. The danger felt gone. The shadows felt quieter. Yeah, I whispered. I think it is. Saying it aloud felt like crossing a threshold I'd avoided for decades. Hale helped us repair the house. We fixed the porch steps, replaced broken boards, scrubbed mold from corners. Jamie painted his room pale blue, insisting it felt like sky. Watching him choose a paint color nearly brought me to tears. I never thought he'd have a room to paint. I replaced the old door with a sturdier one that locked, one that promised safety. As I drilled the last screw, a strange sensation settled into my chest, something warm, steady. Not fear, not grief, not survival instinct. It was belonging, foreign, but welcome. Then came the tractor, the stubborn, rusted beast that had waited like a loyal dog for someone to save it. Jamie begged me to fix it. I hesitated. The machine carried too many memories. But as I stood beside it, running my hands along its battered frame, I realized something. I wasn't that scared boy anymore. I popped the hood, hauled out the old filter, cleaned the carburetor. Oil dripped, bolts groaned, metal protested. But slowly, the tractor remembered life. Jamie sat in the cab making engine noises, laughing. Healing could sound like laughter. I hadn't known that. One evening, after weeks of work, I turned the key. The engine sputtered, once, twice, then roared awake, shaking the barn dust from its bones. Jamie jumped up and down, cheering. I felt my knees buckle slightly. The sound wasn't just a machine revived. It was history, grief, and redemption all humming together. Hale clapped my shoulder. Told you she had life left. I nodded, unable to speak. My father had lived his final years repairing what he could. Maybe this was my chance to do the same, not for him, but for the boy watching me with wide, proud eyes. Days grew into weeks. The house transformed from a relic into a home. Jamie started school in town, the first school he'd attended for more than 3 months. He came home with stories about classmates, teachers, a science project he wanted to try. His backpack, once filled with survival scraps, now carried books, pencils, and half-eaten lunches. Every night he slept deeply, the kind of sleep children are supposed to have. I still woke early, body conditioned to danger, but when I checked on him, I felt a quiet relief pulse through me. He was safe, finally safe. But safety didn't erase the past. One afternoon, Hale and I sat on the porch while Jamie painted a wooden birdhouse. "You're quieter these days," Hale said. "You look like a man waiting for something." I cracked a small smile. "Old habits. You know no one's coming after you." I nodded, though the truth still knotted inside me. Fear doesn't disappear. It shrinks, softens, shifts shape. "Your father wasn't hunted. He was haunted," Hale added. "You don't have to inherit that." I didn't answer, but in my heart, I knew something was shifting. I wasn't running anymore. The biggest change came unexpectedly. A social worker visited the school and recognized my name. She came to the house the next day with a file in hand. "We just need to update your status," she said gently. I braced myself. For years, every interaction with the system felt like a threat. Someone threatening to take Jamie, to question my competence, to judge my worth. But this woman only saw a father who'd finally found stability. "You're doing well," she said. "Your son is thriving." I nearly broke down right there. No one had ever used thriving and my son in the same sentence. That night, Jamie sat beside me on the porch swing, kicking his heels against the wood. "Dad?" he said quietly. "Are we going to stay here forever?" I hesitated. Forever was a word I didn't trust, but I looked out at the land. Our land. The wind rippling through fields that once scared me and now comforted me. "We'll stay as long as you want," I said. Jamie leaned his head on my shoulder. "Then I want forever." My throat tightened. He didn't understand the weight of the word. But maybe, someday, he would. And maybe by then I'd believe in it too. Weeks later, we held a small gathering for Hale's birthday. Some neighbors came. People who remembered my parents, remembered me as a child. They told stories about my mother's kindness, my father's good years before everything fell apart. It was strange hearing those memories spoken aloud, like discovering missing chapters of a book I thought was complete. Jamie listened intently, absorbing every piece of history. "You came from good people," one old woman told me. I nearly corrected her, told her she didn't know the full story. But then Jamie squeezed my hand, and I let the words stand. Eventually, I visited my mother's grave for the first time since I was a teenager. The stone was simple, weather-worn. I didn't bring flowers. I didn't know what she liked. Instead, I placed the notebook Hale had given me on the ground beside her name. "I'm sorry," I whispered, "for leaving, for forgetting, for surviving in ways you wouldn't have wanted." The wind stirred, rustling the grass. I rested my palm on the cold stone. "Jamie would have loved you." My voice cracked. "You would have loved him too. He's better than anything I ever did right." Saying it brought a hollow ache and a strange peace. Months passed, seasons changed, the land grew green, then golden, then pale in winter frost. Jamie and I grew with it, not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily, like seeds learning how to trust soil again. One evening, as we stood watching the sunset bleed across the fields, Jamie slipped his small hand into mine. "Dad," he said softly, "are we alone now?" I looked at the farm, at the tractor, at the house breathing with new life, at him, at us. No, I said, not anymore. And for the first time in my life, I truly believed it.